there's a couple of really fascinating things about this conversation. One is that of all the people in the world, David Seymour is annoyed and gets a little offended that Simon Wilson is, quote, snipping and a bit snarky. David Seymour is worried about someone else snipping and being a bit snarky. But this is a very good conversation. And the good thing about this is the response that Simon gives to David Seymour's face. And we said this last week when we showed a clip where David Seymour looked a little bit uncomfortable. When you get the right person, and Simon Wilson is the right person, actually saying to his face that your policies are shallow, and David Seymour goes, how? And he explains it. Watch David Seymour's body language. This is gold dust, people.
I've heard quite a lot in the last, whatever it is, 10 minutes or so of just complete nonsense, but I just want to pick up on just two of the points. Damien, first, the left smashes stuff up when it doesn't get its way. I think if you...
So for clarity, Damien Grant had said the left smashes stuff up when it don't get their way, like as in they just get violent. That's what he said.
Just a point of order. That's Damien Grant, the twice convicted fraudster.
You said that last time. I don't know the details of that, but I guess so. Yes, I did look that up after you said that to make sure that there was something in there. But yeah, okay. Yeah. So he was saying that the left are violent, basically, and this is the response from Simon. Is this first response to him?
Damien, first, the left smashes stuff up when it doesn't get its way. I think if you look at the history of political action in this country, you'd have to say that the left has been enormously frustrated on so many fronts for decades and actually doesn't smash things up. If people were smashing things up on the left, they would be doing it over climate change at the moment, and Māori would be doing it too because of the baked-in inequities that they confront every day in their lives, and have people like the two of you saying nothing to see here.
Oh,
Simon Wilson speaking for Maori now. Okay,
that is an extraordinary level of actual peaceful opposition. People are not smashing things up in this country. The only people who did that were the protesters at Parliament.
And Murray's Cossacks. Don't forget Murray's Cossacks.
I said there were two things, and the second thing was I wanted to agree with David Seymour.
Look at Seymour's body language.
Chance to do it. The 20% aim, I wrote about this last week. I said there's a real chance that ACT will be sitting on 20%, the National will be sitting on 30%, and if we're looking at a scenario like that, I think we're looking at the next election where ACT will be saying, let's flip that, and would have every chance of doing so. So there's a really big issue at stake in this election, which for everybody, which is, what do we think about ACT? Do we want that to happen? Do we want them to become a really mainstream party in this country?
Isn't it just beautiful that he's talking about David Seymour and ACT like he's not there? He's talking about
the only way to do it.
Like a parent talking about, oh yes, my child would like a sandwich and a bottle of water, please, rather than the child. It's like that. Now, we haven't talked about this actually. At the ACT party conference, they announced, obviously they're going to get rid of all this bureaucracy, but they announced they were going to bring in a layer of bureaucracy that was basically going to be a ministry to look after other ministries. And I wanted to explain that in case people hadn't heard about that yet, because this is one of the criticisms laid at the feet of David Seymour in this conversation.
And leave behind the kind of fringe status they've had. I also said that one of the ways in which they are doing that is that they are appealing to a whole range of frustrations and disappointments and feeling left out. And I quoted Nikki Hager before talking about people who are motivated by that sense of grievance. I think they are appealing to that in a way that is really counterproductive in the way we move society forward. And I took some heart from their conference in the weekend because the flagship policy appeared to be creating what I think of as a ministry of silly walks. And the studio is too small for David to demonstrate it. But the idea that you're going to fight red tape regulation with a ministry of red tape is extraordinary. And it's a very good example of how you go, hey, whistle, 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 there's a problem here for everyone who thinks they've got a grievance. And it doesn't make any sense at all.
So hold on. So I just want to pull up on this. So you have a problem with a political party that stokes a sense of grievance. You have a problem with a political party that goes out there and says to people,
fishing to
"You
say
are
something
being
about the Māori
ripped off and
Party,
cheated by
obviously,
the system."
but wait
You've
for
got
the
a problem
response.
with that, do you,
The
Simon?
problem when it's not based on anything substantial.
Because there is a
So,
political.
Simon, did you actually read our policy on regulatory reform?
Look at
this
the
week?
body
Oh,
language.
I totally did. Yes.
And so, what's not substantial about it?
Well, it's not substantial about it. Every government could do things better. Every government, every administration could have better ways of doing things, more streamlined and more efficient, and that is a constant quest, should be a constant quest for all governments to do that. But the idea that you're going to have a separate ministry that will say to that other ministry over there, we don't think your regulations make sense, that other ministry over there is going to say, well, actually, give us time, we're going to come back to you, and they're going to argue, it's just going to go on and on and on. That is complete nonsense and a waste of time and money.
Let me just fill in for the listener.
Now, just first of all, just note, I mean, David Seymour doesn't like it, obviously. He's offended. Look at his body language and how he's responding. But there's a pretty concise commentary. There's nothing personal in that. You know, he's called it silly, but he's laid out his case, and he said this is why it's bad policy, right? So that's what he said. He hasn't actually attacked Seymour or necessarily ACT. He's just said bad policy, and this is the response from David Seymour.
There's all the parts that Simon may have missed. First of all, there are actually a set of regulatory principles. What problem are we trying to solve? Is it properly defined? What are the costs and benefits of the new rule? Who do they fall on? Is that fair? At the moment, all of that is done right across the bureaucracy, but it's done very poorly and no one takes it seriously. Our idea is to concentrate that analysis in one specialist group who actually does the job well, with a minister who actually holds them accountable for doing the job. And the next part of it is that with those principles established, with the infrastructure to assess rules and regulations, the ACT Party says, well, this is a line in the sand. You know, we're not going to vote for stuff that doesn't pass the sniff test.
You're still cutting 5 ministries and the Human Rights Commission?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what he's saying is the current system set up under human beings is not working, and it's bureaucratic nightmare. We're going to set up a new system under human beings that's going to work. That's what he's saying. And he's saying it's going to work because we're going to set it up. The other system that's been set up for time immemorial doesn't work. Humans are failures, but our humans that we're going to employ and we're going to put in place, they're not going to be failures. Because how is a governing body going to be any different from the current governing body? You know?
Yeah. I've just personally, I've never seen David Seymour look less happy to be somewhere than he is right here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the problem with a lot of politicians that only speak to people that agree with them. Is this is a shit policy, and someone's just going, I've had a look at it. It's shit, and here are the reasons why it's shit, and you should feel bad. And David Seymour is definitely at this place, verifiably feeling bad about it.
We're going to wrap this part up. There's a couple more minutes to go on this one clip, or maybe only a minute and a half. And Simon Wilson does something brilliantly where he actually spells out how good bureaucrats are at their job and what regulations are important for. And then I've got one more clip to play for you after this. And listen out. Just listen out to Simon Wilson carefully. You tell me at the end of this if you think he's been a little bit mean, as in a bit personal. Because when someone says snipping and sniping and snarky and that kind of stuff, it sounds like you're going, well, you're being a bit mean to me. I don't know, what was that phrase? You're getting into the gutter. I haven't heard it yet. But let's just keep listening.
You're going to do all that, but put in a new Ministry of Regulation. It is not true. It is not true to say that most regulations are administered poorly, that our public servants and our local body public servants do a bad job and don't run things.
Well, you got to get out in the real world, mate.
Our buildings don't fall down. Our restaurants don't habitually poison people.
We have people living in motels because in a country that is completely uninhabited, it is so expensive to do anything at all.
We have people living in motels because property prices are so high, and that has distorted the whole market. And we have had decades of underinvestment
and why is that?
in social housing,
because around consenting, around building infrastructure, around building buildings.
Houses.
Yeah, well, we haven't built enough houses. Who owns them is not really important. It's the overall supply that defines the price. So, Simon, you should want this. You should want to be asking, why is it that housing's so unaffordable? Why are there not enough houses in a country that's practically empty? Why are people living in motels?
I do want,
so
and I have
rather than sitting there and sniping and being snarky, you should actually be getting behind better policy and trying to understand what we're saying.
I do want,
because I think people want more conversation about how we solve problems rather than the snippy, snarky.
I do want more streamlined consenting processes.
Oh, okay.
I've written about this
we're
often.
We're showing a way that could be achieved.
I don't believe setting up a new ministry to do it is anything
Follow
more
up
than
Simon, follow-up question.
We just explained exactly how and why.
Chewy, your thoughts, sir? I've got another clip, by the way, but for now, your thoughts.
As the kids say, get wrecked. David Seymour, get wrecked. You scrub. You got owned. Now you're getting salty. Have a tantrum.
The body language was spectacular, though, wasn't it? Wasn't the body language like this?
He was like I've seen him more relaxed around Chloe, and that's saying something.
I mean, look, he's still. This is the, it's like. I mean, I know that body.
He wouldn't even look at him.
No, I know.
He was like, "No, you're not here. I want to acknowledge you."
I want to play one more clip. It's only a couple of minutes. Now, unfortunately, the host, and we do this sometimes, completely gets in the way of this conversation, and goes on to start talking about. I wrote it down. Start asking, like, who's a better leader, Darth Vader or Wayne Brown, and ask these ridiculous questions, and is ACT ready to offer an apology from Rodney Hyde. Now, I've cut all that out because a conversation started, then there was 4 minutes of bullshit in the minute, then the conversation finished. So you'll see where I faded out and faded in the conversation, because what happens here is they start talking about the floods in Auckland, and of course, that's to do with bureaucrats and public servants and people doing work and clearing drains. And the point gets made that actually all these people that Wayne Brown wants to fire or is going to get rid of are all of those people who get called up when the drains get blocked, and are actually the places where the drains worked in Auckland were places where there was good public planning, good city workers making sure that there was new developments that could drain water away. And the places that there was flooding was old places that weren't serviced well by public servants, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a little good example. And there's kind of two 60-second parts of this that they are slammed together, where you'll hear the conversation continue and you'll hear the point that Simon makes towards the end of it. Let's just get back to the end of the clips.
This is the thing about Wayne Brown. People look at what he says and go, gosh, he's doing a good job because that's what he says. Wayne Brown isn't doing those things. He's doing very little of them. In his defence, he's been sidetracked by enormous wild weather storms, and they've preoccupied some of his time.
But you look at the way he dealt to the bureaucracy in the wake of that storm. They screwed him round. He got a report. He stuffed them, and he put them in their place. And that is absolutely what is needed to happen at Auckland Council.
We don't know if he put them in their place yet, but you're quite right. He got an independent report that exposed the whole of the
follow-up question to David. Follow-up question to David.
So before everyone beats up on poor old Wayne, as he did say, nobody died from a lack of empathy. The proof in the pudding. Well, that is absolutely true. Yeah. But the proof in the pudding will be. I mean, he can't be responsible for that. I don't think. The proof in the pudding will be.
Now, just note the balance of Simon Wilson, right? Seymour just said he can't be blamed for those people dying, and Simon Wilson went, "That's true." Like, this is a journalist. This is what journalists look like. He's an opinion piece writer. He's a writer and stuff, but he is someone. When we grow up here, we want to be like Simon Wilson, at least with his balance and his position and his knowledge, because this is a masterclass in how to talk calmly, accurately, and directly to bullshit ideas and bullshit stories.
In the question of whether or not we see improvements in infrastructure, because I've done a survey of Epsom constituents, and what's very clear is the people who got flooded were also the people who knew about problems in their street, who'd complained to the council before about problems in the street. So are we going to see the sucker trucks back? Are we going to see the gravel out of the drains? Are we going to see the capacity increased where intensification's happening, so this doesn't have to happen again? Because many parts of Auckland drained perfectly well. So forget the idea that this is all too rainy and there's nothing that can be done. Things can be done, and I want to see what his response is. Not owning airport shares, clearing the drains.
Simon,
let's just cut right to the chase on this. The parts of Auckland that performed well in those storms are the parts that all those woke public servants who have nothing better to do with their time except talk among themselves and waste money made sure were housing developments where there was proper drainage. They made sure that the water would flow into parks and flood the parks and then dissipate into the ground. They made sure that the drains and the culverts were big enough.
Can I just point out as well, at the moment, and maybe again because of the angle we've got, you may not be able to see it, David Seymour just texting on his phone during this conversation. See that? He's just picked up his phone. He's just on his phone texting in the middle of this conversation.
Flow into parks and flood the parks and then dissipate into the ground. They made sure that the drains and the culverts were big enough, that the roads and the swales beside the roads, which is the green areas.
Yep.
Yeah, they made sure all of that was highly functional. This is the people, some of whom are now losing their jobs at council, and these are the people who generally get sneered at because they're just wasting money.
Matthew Hooton was sneering.
Actually, they have done a very good job. The parts of the city that flood badly are the parts that were built cheaply and poorly in previous times, not particularly through Len Brown or Phil Goff, although everybody's a bit culpable, but it goes back a long way. That it is the suburbs that were built in the 70s and the 80s.
There you go. So in other words, these public servants and bureaucrats and public planners and city workers were a good reason why much of Auckland didn't flood. And
yeah, but that's boring. It's boring work. And we never find out whether they've done a good job or not until 20 years have gone past. So why do we need them? I start a comment, but there's been so many comments. JK, here, it's like saying firefighters aren't fighting fires 24/7, so let's close more fire stations. We actually saw examples of that in Auckland where they closed a central police station under national, and then a couple of years later complaining about inner city crime in Auckland.
It's probably also a little bit like national standards, 2009, 2010, National Party brought in national standards, and now the National Party is complaining about all the 15-year-olds reading, writing and arithmetic, which is a direct result of the policies they brought in 2009, 2010.
You can only ever be held accountable for the things that happen while you're actively at the wheel, and never held accountable for the road you chose to drive down and then handed off to another driver.